Hi everyone and welcome to Adobe Live. We'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which we are creating today and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. My name is Flynn. I'm delighted to be here. I'm here with my good friend and illustrator from Sydney, Australia, Jeremy Lord. Hello, Jeremy.
Hello, Flynn. Hey, everyone.
Hey everyone. We are live. So if you are on Behance or if you are on YouTube, you can let us know if you've got any questions. If you just want to say hi, that's always fun. It's always great to hear where you're from as well. Jeremy and I are both here in Sydney. We've got Johanna looking after us in chat as well today. We're in for a treat and we'll be hanging out doing some illustration stuff as well. Jeremy, what's going on? What's going on with you before we get started? What's new?
Not much. Just yeah, a little bit. Just kind of business as usual at the moment, I think. Just working on some illustrations, trying to learn some new techniques. Last few weeks, we've been doing a lot of kind of pixel art tutorials, something that I've been kind of getting into a little bit more intently. So yeah, and then playing probably a lot more than I should. Some World of Warcraft and doing some artwork.
It's a good time to be a gamer right now. There's a lot of games, very spoilt for choice.
Yep.
I'm glad I'm not like at uni or something. I would never get anything done. But yes, we are here hanging out. And if you missed that pixel art series, so Jeremy's done a few of these with us this year, and this was a pixel art specific series. So if you want to go from not knowing anything about pixel art, using Photoshop to kind of play around with that, add that to your repertoire. If you're just interested a little bit, it's a really great little series to watch because if you watch it back to back, it's just 3 hours. Oh, it's even less than that, I think. And there's a lot of information in there. So go and check that out. I'm sure Johanna will share that in chat for us as well. So if you're watching live or maybe on the replay, you can see that in chat. Go and check it out. It's a good time. It was fantastic to see. But you have something else in store today, so I'll hand it over to you if you want to let everyone know what's up.
Today we're going to today and tomorrow, we're going to double episode. We're going to look into, I guess, kind of like a slightly different technique that I use on occasion that works for a bunch of different things, but I find it works really well for this kind of like mech design, so like robot design. And mechanical. And it's a little bit kind of counterintuitive because you'd think you'd want something like really constructed and really kind of like blocky and well put together in that way, which you do. But when it comes to just kind of creating something from scratch, this technique of kind of random shapes and just kind of, I guess, it's kind of like a Mr. Scribble or like that kind of idea where it's just like, just put something on the page and then kind of like squint and turn it around and flip it upside down. See if you can kind of see any shapes appear in there and like do things, I guess it's like completely by accident. So we're going to look at kind of starting the process of kind of creating a mech in that way. And then tomorrow we're going to get into something a little bit more kind of focused. And I've just kind of come back from watching Alien Romulus, which was excellent. Highly recommend if anybody's not watched it yet. If you're a fan of the Alien kind of saga, this is like bang on. And I really like the style that they've kind of worked with this kind of like retro space where it's like, it's not touch screens. It's not like, holograms and that kind of stuff. It's like, it feels like this is what humans would do with the technology just kind of going forward. It's still like buttons on a wall and kind of like LCD screens, and it's got that grungy feel to it. So we're going to work with that to kind of bring this artwork kind of to life in tomorrow's session. So with that kind of out of the way, let's get stuck straight in.
Okay, sounds great. Let's check it out. So we're using Photoshop today?
We're using Photoshop, and then tomorrow we're going to be using Photoshop and a little bit of Illustrator as well to get some of those kind of like more geometric shapes in. But right now, I'm more concerned about just kind of like just roaming free a little bit, just kind of going a little bit nuts and seeing where that kind of takes us.
Cool.
So there's a couple of ways you can do this. You can do this with a lasso tool, or you can do this with a brush tool. And the idea basically is you want to kind of just do some scribbles, which is exactly kind of like what Mr. Scribble kind of tends to think about, and see kind of where you land on that. I generally kind of stray away from this brush idea because like it might feel a little bit faster, but actually I don't feel like it's as random because I'm still kind of drawing. So there's a temptation to like still make it a thing, if you will. So I like to use the lasso tool and literally just kind of do like something like this, right? So we're going to start out and just make a random kind of scribble like this, right? And then we're going to go Option and Command plus delete fills, like kind of fill with foreground and background. So Option, delete fills with the foreground. And so we've got this weird kind of slightly unpredictable shape that we've created. And it just like there's stuff that we could do with this. Like I could like turn it around to see what's kind of going on. And like already I can kind of see some basic kind of shapes in here, but we're going to want to make a bunch of these and we're going to do them quite fast. So kind of start thinking about like where you could go with this. And then say, all right, so we got something. This one feels a little bit more like a character.
It's like a
so
squid
kind of
standing up.
Oh, yeah, it could be a squid. Absolutely. This one's got a little bit of a fish face kind of thing happening, maybe. So we can do something a little bit more geometric, perhaps. Like, so let's start with a triangle, fill that in, and then let's go a little bit kind of nuts and see kind of where that can potentially take us. You can do this also, like a kind of a fun way to do this if you're kind of struggling to think about shapes is like start working to filling in some of the empty space in this sheet that you've done. So like if we're going to create one in here, like, all right, well, let's create him so that he fits inside of this kind of shape and see where that kind of lands us.
It's kind of like you're making a sticker sheet and you're trying to use as much of the space as possible.
Basically, yeah. That's what that's kind of looking at. And this is like there's no guarantee of anything in this, and there's no kind of like direction, if you will. Like there's not really like a set aesthetic where like all these robots are like aquatic robots or space robots, or there's no idea of function just yet. When we start getting into like creating this a little bit more and like figuring it out a little bit more, we're going to have to think about like, all right, how does this machine actually work? What's it built for? What does it do? Does it have giant arms because it needs to lift things? Does it have like a big like head or no head because it's a big blocky thing, whatever. Right now we're just like, we're going nuts and we're just kind of start, thinking about where do these kind of things go. This is a basically kind of like break the drought kind of idea, right? Like break this idea of like, I don't know what to draw. I can't think of anything original. All my robots are looking the same, or anything else that you're doing really can kind of fit with this idea. This is basically kind of like, that like this sense of like breaking that drought. So we can do something a little bit random like this and kind of see where that goes, or we can start to give it a little bit more direction, but using the same kind of idea, right? So we've got, let's say I'm going to make some like crawler bot, right? So I'm going to want something in here. There's maybe going to be like a screen in the middle. He's got a little bit of an antenna up here. And I'm doing this all with a continuous line, right? So we're going to get some crab legs in here. And that continuous kind of selection will make some really weird things happen for us. And then like I can come back in and kind of fix stuff, give it a little bit more of that kind of thought process, if you will, where it's like, all right, well, that whole front there was filled. Maybe it needs a bit of a window to work from that. Maybe it's not quite that big. Maybe he's like a super armored thing. So the view of the robot is actually like really small. There's only a little bit happening that you can look out of, if you will. And we can kind of do some links in between the crab legs here. So that one's got a little bit more kind of like will and direction, which is again something that you could totally do as well, and start thinking about like, how does this look if I start planning things rather than just going random? and not thinking about too much.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really enjoy doing something like this. And so once you've got a bunch of these on the page, the idea is then you start trying to figure out what's going on with a bunch of these. So we're going to drop the opacity on this and create a new layer. And now it's time to kind of like define these a little bit. So let's take this one in the middle here. There's something kind of like aquatic based on this. So let's say, all right, we've got a window. And that's kind of going to be the basis for that. And then he's got some kind of like submarine kind of like fins on either side that we can start to add into it. And I don't have to stick to this like super directly, right? I can start kind of playing around with this shape and kind of seeing where that ends up kind of going. But the overall idea is still there, and it's still going to kind of work to something that's quite cool. I like this idea that he's got a rudder behind there. That's probably what made me think that this should be some kind of like ocean.
Yeah, it's interesting that because I didn't see that at all until you were almost done with that shape. And then I was like, oh, I see. It's coming towards you. It's coming like this way. It's a bit like when you're sitting down there looking at clouds, right? Like everyone's going to see something slightly different.
Totally. And that's the idea, right? Like you're seeing a squid in there. So like the whole point of this is like you see this, I see something else. It's going to give me a little bit of a different kind of idea to work from. So like for like this one, for instance, over here, this one's like a really weird shape. Like, I don't know, maybe we've got a big kind of like window over here. And then there's a big kind of, I don't know, big cone happening up there. And then we can start to like fill in some ideas of like how these kind of mechs come to life. And then maybe it's just a giant kind of like engine vent on the edge here that kind of goes out to there. And then he's got like anti-grav stuff and replicate that on the other side. Like, again, like who knows what this machine does, if it does anything at all, aside from just look really weird and kind of sitting there. But again, this might give you an idea of like, hey, this is wacky. I've never done this before in that way. There's something potentially really cool I could do with this. And then the same, like here, maybe this one, I don't know, like we looked at a squid for this one. So maybe this one is totally just a squid kind of thing, right? And so he's got all these kind of tentacles coming out of him in that way. And his window is just right here, tiny at the bottom. And that's it. And then everything else just kind of sits on top. And maybe he's got some cables coming out of him because why not? Because he's a squid.
He's squid and cable squid.
Yeah. So that's basically what this kind of, that sheet can kind of go on and on and on and on with a range of different things. So these are ones that I prepared kind of earlier that have kind of different shapes, different overall kind of like shape language. They would feel like they do different things. Legs, arms, fins, you name it. All these kind of like weird and wacky things that can lead you to, I think, something just like really fun and original if you're kind of stuck with that. So that, again, that's just a really quick technique. You can apply this to a bunch of different things. But as I said, I feel like this, for some reason, really applies well to this idea of like invent a robot that just does a weird thing that has like attachments and things to it that work in a certain way.
Yeah. No, it's super cool. Like obviously great exercise anyway, just to do or like warm up, but just get yourself out of that rut as well when you're like, oh, I don't know what to draw, or I'm looking at reference and I can't find exactly what I want. And it's a pretty cool little experimentational kind of pure creativity, right? Like pure just letting loose.
Yeah, and I think, and just get some like really original stuff. Like I would never have drawn something like this dude down here. It's like, what even is that? It's so weird and like wacky, but he looks like some cool little like Nintendo character robot. Like it doesn't all have to always be serious either. It can all, like this guy can have like his screen is the face, and that's how it kind of operates, and like whatever, right? You can just have a little bit of a play around with stuff and kind of see how it looks. So that's kind of first technique. Second technique that you can do to kind of break this this kind of inspiration drought is this idea of mixing two images together and playing with Photoshop's blending modes. To, again, exactly in a similar kind of principle, you're doing this, and then you're like, all right, let me kind of see if I can see anything popping out at me from this. And what I've got with this is basically I've gotten these two images. So I got this illustration that I did, and then this illustration that I did, and then I'm just smacking them together with blending modes, right? I got a separate layer in between here. So I got this, it's kind of just zoomed in and cropped in on that arm. And then this guy, which has been put on a divide layer and inverted as well. And then overlaid with this. And then I've also got this kind of thing happening in here for like extra randomness that you can mess around with. There's kind of no end to this, as long as like you just keep messing around with stuff until you find a different shape in there, and it's like, oh cool, that works, that was kind of fun. Again, just kind of trying to be like random about it as much as you can. And then in here it's the same thing, like you're going to see something, I'm going to see something totally different, but it might lead us to an unexpected result again, right? So like I'm kind of seeing this feature over here. That's quite cool. So that's going to kind of maybe be a big like vat of some kind. And then these tubes that are going to come out of that go down into here. And then there's this weird like organic shape. And then you might end up even like this thing over here kind of feels like some alien kind of shape. And then we can take the shape from that mask over there that kind of comes in and kind of sits there, and we've got 1, 2, 3 kind of dots, and more tubes going in, and just like, you know, really, again, same principle, just randomizing shapes to see kind of what comes out of it, so that you can create something really quite like original and fun to work from. So maybe these tubes just come out to nowhere, and then we've got, yeah, something like that, right? So we've landed on this like weird like nose robot, or I don't know what this is. But again, now we can start to kind of like try and figure this out a little bit more and see where that's going to take us and what we can do with this, but based on something totally different. I've also seen people do this with random objects. So there's a bunch of illustrations out there, people making like spaceships and stuff from like a bottle opener or like a bottle of shampoo, or just like a spatula, and it's just like, and it's this robot, and then to add stuff to it that creates this visual language. But again, the idea is just like, hey, let's mess around and kind of see where this is going to go. So I'm quite liking these, and now we can start to think about how to refine these. So I'm actually going to go in and start thinking about getting some reference, right? So what we just did here is like you're short on inspiration, you're not really sure where to go from this. This breaks that lack of inspiration. Once you have an idea, I quite like this guy. This dude, I feel, is quite cool. Is something that we could do with that fits with this idea that I'm having over here, which is this famous kind of like alien loader from the second Aliens movie, where she fights the Queen at the end. Spoiler alert.
It must be 30 years old movie, right? At this point.
Yeah. I like that this thing is not like too like modern. It looks like it could exist today, kind of, right? Like You can see what this thing is built for. You can see kind of how it works. It's got pneumatic pumps. It's got like buttons. It's got like antennas, seat belts, even like a cage for a person to go into. I like this idea of this robot. And because it's a lifting robot, the main feature is its arms. And it's just got two forks and then these huge, huge arms that are like double the size of its entire body. I quite like that idea. So we're going to use this as like a visual language reference, this idea of like these pumps that look like kind of like caterpillar arms, like from like a digger or something. And you can see kind of where they're placed, and there's like hinges and all that. So this is now when we get into the nitty gritty of like, how does this thing work? What does it need to have in order to do its job, right?
Yeah.
Like, where do the pumps need to be? Where do the tubes go? Where are the joints and the angles and all that kind of stuff? And it's super fun to work to in that way. So what we don't want is something like this, where it's like, hey, I'm Tony Stark and I invented this thing, and like it does all these amazing, wondrous things, but who knows actually how it works at its core?
Right.
Like, what does that rotating circle do? Nobody knows. It's just too like arcane. Whereas this thing you can look at and be like, oh yeah, I can see what this thing is going to do and how.
Because it kind of mimics what a excavator might be, or it's like, okay, so there's
totally,
it might be more advanced, but there's hydraulics there, you know, there's some wires, it's got power, you can see where it would bend and pivot and things like that. Yeah,
exactly. And that's what we're going to kind of be looking at a little bit today. So I'm going to bring in, but we're going to do it, we're going to make our own based on that. So let me grab this guy.
Aliens came out in 1986, by the way.
Yeah, the first one. Yeah.
It's crazy. "38 years old movie we're discussing here.
Still just amazing.
It's still really good, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Such a classic, amazing action movie. Just really well done. A lot of people always ask, what's your favorite? 1, 2, 3, or 4? Like, I'm not talking about like Covenant and Prometheus or anything like that. I think it's a tough one, man. Like, a lot of people don't like number 3. I really do like number 3.
Is that the one where they're on the glacier, the ice one?
Yeah, they're like inside of like a prison, and it's like there's just the one alien.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so I'm just making my layers and just kind of naming them and just getting ready to rock and roll on this. We're going to obviously have to do some edits to this, because at this stage, this guy doesn't actually have anything that he can grab with. But maybe let's do something. Maybe he doesn't need to. Maybe he can be just like a digger robot or something. And so let's potentially kind of think about how this could work at this stage. So we've got a kind of a cage for somebody to sit in. So we're going to drop the opacity down a little bit more on this. We can start to think about how this is going to work and where does a person kind of sit. So I've got a body over here that I kind of created. And what we're going to do in order to work from this is we're going to work simple, and then we're going to build shapes on top of that. And we've got some reference here like this, right? So this is basically kind of what you want to do when you're working from kind of scratch with this kind of stuff. Is first you get the perspective and the shapes and the blocks right, and then you add detail on top of that basic kind of function, if you will. So that's what we're going to try and kind of emulate with this. And we're just going to work to this idea, right? So we've got this like bent shape. This can also be really good like drawing practice. There's a lot of exercises out there that look at this kind of idea for practice of like draw cylinder and then add in kind of, I did that horribly, but add in kind of shapes to that, and then add in a separate kind of shape and then make that one into a kind of a square or like a more kind of blocky shape, and then try and figure out how that's going to look, right? Like where are the shapes on that? It's a really good overall exercise that you can just kind of do as a warm-up to just get the basics of a certain thing down pat and down right. So again, we're going to continue with this, and I'm just kind of setting things down on here, setting basic kind of volumes and working to that, and not too worried about kind of adding in some detail. Don't get lost in like, you know, oh, this thing's going to have a panel here where there's going to be a ton of buttons. Like we'll do that later. Like once the framework for this is done, we can start to think about adding details and whatnot. So we need to put kind of like a space here for all the kind of tech and stuff for the arms to come out. So we're going to have these kind of giant arms coming out of this, and they're going to be these kind of big blocky squares. So big kind of rectangle over here, and maybe I'm working a little bit too large, and to give myself some space, I need to bring that in a little bit. I'm going to stop that here actually, and just do this, and then down, and there. And we can do that on the other side as well. So we're going to have a shape that's going to come out, and this is where working with these simple shapes to begin with is going to save you potentially a lot of kind of redrawing time, because you're going to need to figure out like the other side of this. And so now I'm looking at that and thinking it's not quite looking as even as I'd think, so I need to move that down a little bit. And then I've got this shape coming out of that. There we go. That's a little bit better for that arm, and I think I've actually made that a little bit too big as well. Because obviously you want a little bit of symmetry happening as well, right? And then we can kind of start thinking about like a basic kind of like, there's a whole like visual language with like mechanical things and how they work and what they can do that you can kind of familiarize yourself with a little bit. But basically you've got this idea of like of an elbow, right? If you think of what like an elbow looks like, if you simplify it down, it's basically kind of like this shape, right? Like the bone in your arm kind of does this. And then on the other side is a shape that kind of like receives that.
Yeah.
That looks like this. And so we've got this like hinged kind of idea, if that makes sense, where like this can rotate and that can rotate, if you will, and they kind of rotate around each other. So we're going to try and emulate this idea of like a human skeleton or an animal skeleton, and create this kind of like a hinge joint there for that arm to be able to like bend. And so we're going to put that kind of joint here and bring that over there. And then we can add in a separate shape that looks like it can kind of rotate out of that. That's going to go and live here. And then we've got a separate kind of perspective happening on that as well. And we can start to maybe erase some of these lines in here that are kind of confusing me a little bit. And there we go. I'm cheating the perspective just a touch, just so that it doesn't kind of link up too much and doesn't look too kind of too difficult to read this image.
Right.
because we want to make sure that this area is quite obviously kind of different.
So you're exaggerating it a little bit more.
I am, yeah.
Yeah.
And there's going to be quite a bit of figuring out to do as we're kind of working to this of like, how does that hinge kind of actually work and what's it doing? And then thinking about like, does this thing have hands, or is it like one of those like shovel things with the teeth at the end of a digger that you can kind of see, and like how that looks. So we'd probably have to get some reference of that and kind of blah, blah, blah. Or do we just want to have it be like a big like shovel kind of thing, right? So let's say that it was that. So let's think about like, all right, so we got a thing that can come out of there. That's going to be a bit of a digger paddle kind of thing. So it's a big kind of shovel shape. So that's going to sit like that. And kind of be able to dig in that way. And obviously then underneath that is going to be hidden. I don't mind that. It kind of looks like almost like a giant, just like pinball kind of thing happening.
Oh, pinball things. Yeah, that's right. It's like cool. A big paddle.
Yeah, like the little like flipper of a pinball.
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, like why not? Right? It can be that, or it can be a giant hand. If we again divide this into our kind of like fingers, it can start to think about like, what does it look like if it's a hand and then like a big thumb comes out there? It's still like a nice kind of shape to have, and then how that kind of links up into there, whatever. So we got to do the same thing on the other side and think about how that's going to look. So we're going to think about this and bring in that extra shape over here. And then our paddle. And again, I'm too big, so got to bring it in.
And we scaled it down without holding down shift. Well done. I always do it the wrong way in Photoshop still to this day. It's been like 5 years.
I do tend to forget a little bit sometimes as well. This is something else that I do every now and then as well. I just want to rotate this a little bit. So I'm going to move the anchor point of the rotation to do that. And it's going to kind of give me that kind of like almost like puppeteering shape that I can work to. That's going to be quite cool. And then again, we can look at kind of like that extra thing there.
It's got another flipper.
Another flipper and another kind of source for that. Yeah, I think this is not working at all up here. This is not making any sense. So it's kind of weeding me out because that kind of link is just not on. So I kind of put myself in a tough spot with this one, I think. That's better. And now I'm going to liquefy this so I can fix it a little bit, because one side looks much bigger than the other. So I'm just going to bring this up a little bit. It'll distort those shapes and like bend them, but that's okay. I'm still just using this like as a intermediary pass that I'll then fix a little bit later on.
It's a bit like a transformer at the moment.
Yeah.
Couple cars.
He doesn't have anything to stand on. But he's going to have a hard time kind of looking right if I give him something to stand on. So maybe I'm not going to bother. Maybe I'm going to do like a jump in the future and just give him like a jet.
Hovering. Yeah.
So he can just kind of fly there. And that can just come out of that right there. Now we're going to go in and do second pass at this. So we're going to drop the opacity down. And like, I don't necessarily always do this many kind of passes. But when you're working on something like this, where you've got like a rough and that came from like this weird shape. It's a good idea to just kind of take it in stages a little bit more and kind of see where that lands, rather than try and do it all from the same kind of thing. So now is when we're going to go into our thing here, and I'm just going to drag some of these references into my image so they can kind of sit there and live next to it. And that's going to mean a little bit of kind of just reference that I can use that's just sitting there that I don't have to worry about too much, and not have to swap out of my program to see. So we're looking at this, and we're just going to smack these two guys back together. And I need to make my layer again because I put that in there afterwards. Okay, so let's start with this kind of cage thing with the little kind of like alarm light. I don't know what those are called, but whatever. So we can kind of zoom in on that and kind of think about how does that look? There's a little bit of a protection. What does it do? It's making sure that the person doesn't get hit by something. So we can start thinking about like building that out. And because we've got this basic kind of shape to work from, it's going to make this idea a lot easier to work from, because I've got a basic skeleton kind of framework to start from. That's just going to make my life a whole lot easier going forward. And then we can start thinking about like, all right, how does that join back into that shape, and what's making that kind of come back in. And this is where that's going to like start really developing a little bit more of a visual language that's akin to a robot, that's going to tell people looking at it what they're looking at, what's it doing and why, and so on and so forth. And again, important to try and make sure that things are well constructed, because this is not an organic shape. And so if you start messing up the perspective of things, you're potentially going to make life a little bit harder for yourself. So any line like this, for instance, like that's no good, right? Like this needs to look like it's built in the same way on both sides. And so it's important to try and get that right.
Is it like this perspective is like has like a I don't know, almost like a vanishing point, like off in the distance? Like it seems like it's quite a hard angle.
Yeah. So again, like that, what I've done what I've done on the arms with this is making that perspective a little bit difficult to work from. If I was working straight on, I'd just use a symmetry tool and everything would be symmetrical, which is also something that you can do for sure. And it makes your life quite a bit easier. But trying to like make this not just look like a schematic, and trying to make it not too kind of obvious.
Yeah.
And so it's nice to have a little bit of kind of perspective wrapped up into this as well. So now we can start thinking about like how this is going to work up here. And we're going to put our... Anybody know what those things are called?
Like that might be on a
police
cherry picker or something, or like a...
Yeah.
Are you thinking more the siren, like the flashing lights?
Yeah, the thing that has like a light inside and it kind of like, you know,
I don't know what that's called.
Anyways, you can stick that there. Give him a bit of an antenna. He's got to get his signal from somewhere, so we can put that in there. Using the shift tool on that one to just get a straighter angle, just makes my life a little bit easier for that. So yeah, And then we can start thinking about like looking at some of these things in here, right? So we can start thinking about like, what are these kind of little add-on things doing? These are the flary things. Like this little weird shape here doesn't really obviously have a purpose, but it just adds a little bit of like coolness and visual language to our whole thing.
Yeah.
So we can start thinking about like how we're going to do that on our one. And thinking about like, all right, well, there's an engine inside this thing, right? So maybe this is where like the bulk of the engine work is happening. So let's add that in here. And then think about like, all right, well, engine needs to like vent out stuff. So maybe there's this little kind of like side vent that you get on the side of like jet engines.
Yeah.
Right? Where we got this. Maybe it also needs to have like some reinforcement kind of idea. So we're going to put in this kind of plating where there'd be some bolts happening on here. Right? And like how do these two kind of plates join into each other to reinforce again that shape? Because this is it's a hard-working robot, so it needs to be quite strong, and like well built. So we need to think about like, how does that link up into another shape, and what joins them up together?
Yeah, that's cool.
And then potentially like think about doing the same thing on that side where we've got space for some kind of screws to go on. So like that plate is linking up with the other plate.
Yeah.
And then maybe, I don't know, maybe we can start to think about like, all right, this thing's got some kind of like console-y shape or something happening on that. And maybe there's like a big over here.
It's quite cool. And I suppose you could go as deep as you wanted to with reference as well. Like I was thinking, you were talking about, the vent or something. So you could suddenly just go, cool, what has vents? Like maybe I should look at how computers vent hot air or jets or tractors or something.
Okay, well, so that's a really good idea, right? So let's look at like, let's go in here and look at like a graphics card fan.
Yeah.
Graphics card get like really overheated really fast, and so how do they look? That's cool, right? Really dig. Let's see where we're gonna look at this one and think about like, all right, how's that working? Let's take that and bring it into our image here, and he can just sit there for sure. And then like maybe this thing has like these two giant kind of like vents in here that can kind of sit and that cool it down. So we've got a little kind of square area, rectangle area that's going to divide into two squares, and we're going to create 1 and 2. And actually I'm actually going to take this and I'm going to delete it. So Command X, Command Shift V is going to place it in that area. So now I can do the same thing I did to this, and use that as a basis for like drawing these two fans, right? So we got 1 and 2. Looks like speakers at the moment, which is also kind of cool.
Like cartoon eyes. It's like, ugh.
Yeah.
Gets a silly
and you can
voice.
look at like AC units, like air conditioning units, and see kind of like how do the fans work outside of those, and like where they're placed and how they're placed. Again, these would probably be bolted down as well onto this because there's like a cage that they fit on.
It's cool. I like that idea of them being bolted in and things, or they need to be replaced, or there's a panel there because it needed to be welded shut again. Like that kind of background story.
Or like, this thing needs to be like open so that the person can get in. So like maybe, I don't know, like that, maybe this cage doesn't bolt in quite properly, or maybe there's like a hinge on this one where like that has got a big like rotating hinge onto it that clearly kind of links into this, where like that thing can come out and like the person can get in, right? So there's heaps that you can do and think about kind of creating when you're doing this, in terms of like, how does this thing actually function? What does it do? What's it likely to have to kind of do? And like, in order to show that to people, you need to like use like references to things that they've seen before, and create those in that way. And oh yeah, by the way, like doing this kind of stuff is going to test your ellipse skills, like your ellipse drawing skills to no end. It's not just perspective, it is also going to be a ton of ellipse. Sometimes I cheat a little bit, and we'll look at this tomorrow when we jump into Illustrator, but sometimes I do cheat a little bit, and I will just make on a separate layer, I'll do this, and that's all good. And then I'll just kind of squash that down, rotate it, and bring it in to fit what I need it to fit. And then just use that as a model. If you're really kind of struggling with ellipses, no reason you can't just kind of help yourself with something like this and then just do it that way.
Yeah.
Because ellipses are an absolute pain in the butt to get right. And we do need to get this right, because otherwise it's going to look just dismal. A little bit bigger. Yep.
Is that a little bit bigger because of the perspective is going off into the distance on the left side? Yeah.
Yep. Looks like he's got a big face on there, big eyeballs or something.
It does a little bit.
Funny. What else have we got on here that we're missing? I should have really done these blades before duplicating it. It would have been smarter. Then I don't have to draw them twice. In fact, I'm going to do that. Done. You're out. And grab you.
Keeps looking more and more like a face.
It is, isn't it? I don't know what I can do to like make it not do that. I could put something on top of this, maybe. Thinking about like maybe there's like just a little bit of a grid on top of it. So that's going to be tricky, because obviously then maybe the fan is difficult to read underneath that kind of protective grid. But any fan you do needs to have that kind of like thing to stop stuff from like flying into it, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of
now
one
it's
of those
Kanye
basic
West.
kind of principles. Yeah. So we can do something like that. And then one of the tricks I like to do in order to like make this not as difficult to read is on the top side of this, we can start to kind of just erase along the lines of our kind of grid here, just to show a little bit of a cheat when you're using just inking with black like this. And doing that will just make that kind of grid separate from the fan behind it and make it more visually kind of.
Definitely. That made a huge difference.
I keep pressing escape on my rotate tool because trying to snap it back and it keeps bringing up the controls of that.
Does that make the
around me.
lines look 3D or something? Is that, or it tries to
It's
imitate a
basically what it's
shadow?
doing
Or?
is it's thinking about like if you've like those little lines are going to be cylinders, right? And so the light's going to hit them here and the shadow is going to be underneath. And so all that's doing is it's kind of, I say it's cheating because it's adding in lighting in an otherwise area where there is no lighting actually in this drawing yet.
Yeah.
But it's just a nice little visual trick to just sort of say like, this is behind, that's in front. And it just adds a little bit more clarity. And we can still see the fan behind it. And we can still kind of work that out for ourselves and even kind of fill that in if we wanted to or not. But just gives it a little bit more kind of clarity with that. So yeah. Oops. So again, see, like this is my problem here. I want a shape to go here, but if it does that, then it doesn't quite look right because this distance is bigger than that distance. So I need to think about how, like where I've gone wrong here and what I've kind of screwed up. And I think what I need to do is I need to grab this guy and change the scale of him. So I'm just going to hold down Command while I'm doing this and just warp this a little bit more to add some more perspective to it.
Yeah.
And just sit him just there. And now that's going to work much, much better for what I'm trying to do with this.
We only have 2 minutes left, actually.
Yeah. So again, like, you know, I can then start thinking about like where other stuff goes. Like, let's put a little bit of a chair in here for somebody to kind of sit in. And again, like you look at car chairs and like how they kind of function and what they're likely to look like, and get that visual language of like a chair of a car with potentially like a seatbelt coming in, like we did over here. Like we've got this padded thing with a seatbelt and all types of different kinds of things going on there that kind of shows people this is what I'm doing. This is the kind of the visual language that I'm kind of talking about. So recognize it as that thing. But yeah, this is
awesome.
Starting to come together a little bit.
It's looking super cool. Should we plug tomorrow just before we jump off? I've got something I've got to show as well. I want to show everyone, talk about.
Let's do it.
I might do my thing really quick and then we'll plug tomorrow. Okay. So join us again for tomorrow with Jeremy Lord, same time. But I also want to talk about for the first time on Adobe Live as we get up to Adobe Max. There is actually for the first time, Adobe Max Awards. I'm just showing it on the screen. So Creativity Awards, I think it's open to most countries. And there's a QR code on the screen, so you want to grab that or pause the video if you're watching it on demand. And you can enter for your chance to have your work showcased in the Max keynote. So I think there's about 5 or 7 people and their work will be showcased on the main stage at Max. And there's a whole bunch of other prizes and things like that, including paid travel to go to Adobe Max, which would be pretty cool as well. So that's on screen. If anyone wants to enter that, recommend you do. It's going to be a short competition. So I always feel like those short competitions are good ones to enter because I feel like less people do enter them. So go check it out. If you're a creator of any kind, go and check that out. So that's very fresh off the press stuff. So I thought I'd let everybody here know. Yeah.
That.
So tomorrow, do you want to give us a quick little plug as we jump out, Jeremy?
Yeah. So tomorrow we're going to be kind of finishing this off a little bit. We're going to be jumping into some color, some texture as well. So getting this kind of like worn kind of look, like it's got paint chips and stuff. We're going to create some decals in Illustrator and some basic kind of shapes like this. So you saw me kind of doing this a little bit today where I'm starting to think about like how this is going to work and trying to work with ellipses. That can be a bit of a pain in the butt to do all in Photoshop. So we're going to do those kind of assets in Illustrator and we're going to bring it all together and then make this into kind of like a little bit more of a an image that has a context. So we're going to make this into a post a
Cool.
little bit.
All right, we're out of time. Thank you, Jeremy. We'll see you all tomorrow. See you next time. Thanks for joining. Bye bye.
Thanks.